our study of higher philosophy because basically we need to get through the course so we're able to fully assess you when the time comes. So, the end of last term, we were looking at our final unit, which is knowledge and doubt. We're basically studying epistemology, which is the philosophical theory or study of knowledge. And we've looked at a few things so far. So, we've looked at the distinction between knowing how and knowing that. We've also looked at the idea of skepticism, this idea that knowledge is basically something which is at best something which is doubtful, at worst something which we cannot possibly have. And we've also had a look at the tripartite theory of knowledge, the idea that knowledge is justified true belief. And in doing that, we also looked at what we call Gettier counterexamples, which were proposed by the philosopher Gettier, who kind of showed this idea that we can be actually sometimes accidentally correct, even if we do have justified true belief. So, what we're going to be looking at this week are 3 lessons on different approaches to knowledge. So, if you're in philosophy class D, that's the class that has me on Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday. You've already done this first lesson. However, you might find it beneficial to go through this video lesson just so you get me commentating on the materials that you've already gone through. What we're going to be looking at is basically 2 ideas. We're looking at, in this lesson and the next lesson, the idea of rationalism. And in the final lesson of this week, we're going to be looking at empiricism. And these 2 theories say that we get knowledge in very different ways. What we're going to do is we're going to start by looking at rationalism, and we'll see how they claim we are able to say we know something. So the whole point of this unit, remember, is to work out what knowledge is. Not only what knowledge is, but how do we get knowledge? How am I able to say that I know that it's January 31st today? This is what we need to be asking ourselves throughout this unit. So, I'd like you to take down the title, Rationalism 1, Plato's Cave. Your learning intentions in this lesson are to understand what's meant by the term rationalism and to learn about Plato's allegory of the cave. So, let's get started. First thing I'd like you to do, without knowing anything else about rationalism and empiricism, I'd like you to write down how you think you come to know something. How do you come to the conclusion that, for example, you go to Lossy High School, or that the earth is round? So I'd like you to write down your thoughts on this. How do you think you come to actually know something is true? Okay, so I'd like you to take this note down. So, rationalism is the belief that knowledge begins in the mind, and we're all born with knowledge in the mind, and this is already certain. This is what we call innate ideas. Basically, what that means is that these ideas are in our minds from birth. We already know things, and over time, we can use our reasoning to have these things revealed to us. So this is what we call innate ideas. Some rationalist philosophers include Plato, who we're studying today, Augustine, who you won't study in this course, Descartes, who's our main philosopher of focus starting next week, Leibniz, who we'll study in the next lesson, and Kant, who we've studied already. So remember, Kant, with his moral philosophy, was saying that we can reason in our heads without any idea about consequences if an action is right or wrong. This is what we call a rationalist approach to morality, because we're being rational. We're thinking, only thinking about the rightness or wrongness of the action without thinking about any consequences. anything, remember, to do with consequences or experience for Kant is irrelevant because it's hard to predict or almost impossible to predict. So, what rationalists say is that the way to arrive at justified true belief, so the tripartite theory of knowledge, is through reason, logical thinking, and innate ideas. And we call this kind of knowledge a priori. And in the arguments and action unit, you've already looked at this idea about a priori and a posteriori knowledge. A priori knowledge is knowledge that we get without experiencing something that we can know through reason. So, for example, I can tell you that a triangle has got three sides, and you don't experience a triangle in the real world to believe that to be true. Laws like 2 plus 2 is 4 is something you know without experiencing that law in practice, because it's something that you can reason through the laws of mathematics. A posteriori knowledge is knowledge that we get after or through experience. So, for example, today I'm wearing a green shirt. If someone saw me in the street, they could say, well, there's Mr. Ferrier, if they knew who I was, or that man wearing a green checkered shirt. And they would only be able to say that through seeing me wearing the green checkered shirt. So, introducing you now to Plato. Plato was a philosopher who lived in ancient Greece during the classical period. Basically, Plato is one of the most fundamentally important philosophers and historical figures in history. Basically, he wrote on a wide range of philosophical issues, including ethics, which is right and wrong, ontology, which is how we categorize things, metaphysics, which is the nature of reality, and epistemology, which is our study of knowledge. Basically, Plato, if you go to study philosophy at university, you cannot really go through a course without looking at Plato's work in some way or another. Plato himself was a rationalist. What I'd like you to do is just take down the first point and the last point. So, Plato made the distinction that between how we perceive the world, so what we think we see, and actual reality, how things actually are. He believed that there should be a way to define these two states. So, he believes that our perception of the world is based on the senses and authority, and is thus unreliable as a solid foundation for knowledge. So, if I say that I can see the moon in the sky, Plato would say that that I am relying on my senses. So therefore, it's not a good foundation to say that. Basically, my senses can be deceived. How many times, for example, have you experienced an optical illusion? You think you see something moving on a bit of paper, but it's not. We've also got issues of authority. So authority, for example, is me right now giving you information about Plato. Maybe my authority is not as good as it could be, for example, so it's not reliable. So Plato has this idea that there is reality and our perception of reality. Plato believed that reality and knowledge that we could be certain of could only be based from justifications from rational thought. He isn't totally dismissing knowledge from senses like other philosophers, but this knowledge could only confirm knowledge justified from reason. Okay, so basically, we can only know if something is true through reason, through rationality, in the same way that Kant decided something was right or wrong based on this kind of process of rationality of reason. Plato believes that reality can only be understood through, or knowledge can only be confirmed through reason as well. So, you're going to watch this video clip about Plato's cave allegory and take notes. Basically, Plato's allegory of the cave is there to highlight the distinction between reality and how we perceive reality. Basically, the shadows represent what we see of reality. We only see the shadows. That is an impression of reality. Whereas what's really out there is something which we cannot experience ourselves. So I'd like you to watch this video clip and take notes. I'd then like you to read pages 11 and 12 of your booklet and complete the storyboard activity. You don't have to do the question about the allegory of the cave being relative to skepticism, just the storyboard activity. This is the end of your video lesson on Plato and rationalism. So make sure you take good notes, make sure you complete all the tasks, and if you submit a photograph of your storyboard, that will suffice as evidence for me to say that you've done this lesson's worth of work. If you've got any questions, please get in touch, and I'll see you in the next lesson.